So welcome to the class. Today we're going to be talking about kind of a gap, I think, in a lot of people's skill set when it comes to doing their landscape. Is not everybody really knew how to take care of a localscape when they put it in, and so this class is going to help fill in the gaps and give you an idea of exactly how to do a localscape. And hopefully by the time this is done, you'll have some confidence in going forward and doing it the right way. So the goal here is, now remember, localscape is a little bit of lawn, but a lot of garden bed. And so what we're going to end up is we're going to try to go from that top screen all the way down to this bottom one, so that we can get ready for the new year's growth. So hopefully you'll be able to learn the methods and timing to make this your garden beds look really pretty. Okay, so the way I've organized this is we're going to do a to-do list. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter what order you do these in. Just kind of go through the list as long as you kind of do all the pieces. This is the list that I kind of generally do it here at work. So this is what we're going to do. But again, you can kind of do these in whatever order you would like. But I did want to put this as a to-do list as we go through. So first things first, we're going to go through and we're going to rake the leaves, cut down dead and dying perennials, clean up some ornamental grasses, prune the shrubs, control some weeds. Optional is applying fertilizer. It's a good time to do it. Thicken up the mulch and start the irrigation system, make some basic repairs. Okay, so raking the leaves. There are benefits to raking and to not raking. So the benefits to not raking is it retains moisture over the winter. So a lot of that winter snow, winter rain, you can help kind of maintain that moisture into spring. The rotting leaves return nutrients to the soil like compost does. And wildlife often uses the leaf litter to find nesting material. So birds will use the leaves and twigs on the ground for nesting materials. There are certain beneficial caterpillars, praying mantises and stuff will actually lay their eggs down in that leaf litter. And so leaving it down there before you rake, that can actually have some benefits. However, there are so the benefits of not raking. So those benefits of not raking. Potential problems, however, caused by not raking. Leaves provide shelter for a lot of existing diseases. A lot of fungal diseases or other things will remain in the leaves, fall on the ground, and then they'll be waiting for the plant when they come out the next year. So a lot of overwintering fungal diseases can transmit through that way. Large leaves on the ground promotes all kinds of root rot and fungal diseases. So having it wet on the ground for a long time, especially in the cooler temperatures, has the potential to put some disease pressure on your plants. So again, there are benefits to raking and not raking. So kind of here's my take on it. Here's our take on it. I think it'd be a shame to take all this great material you've got for composting and throw it in a bag and then take it out to the landfill. I think one way or another, it would be a good thing to do to go ahead and find a way to use those leaves. So some specific advice here. Go ahead and rake the leaves up. I think the benefits of raking away the potential diseases on the leaves outweighs the potential benefits. So if you look at this picture right here, you can actually look right through here, and actually there are a couple fungal spots on that leaf itself that could overwinter and affect your plant the next year. Shred the leaves up, mow them over a recycle mower, use a chipper shredder you can get from the store. You can actually rent these things. Chip them up and then throw them into a compost pile. These actually are a great organic layer that you can use if anybody is kind of doing some of the vegetable gardening that they call the lasagna style gardening. Keep them in a pile, use them as mulch. So really, like, go ahead and shred them up, chip them up, throw them into a pile somewhere, and try to use them as compost later on. All right, so we're going to go done with the raking of leaves. So Nat, these chapter breaks are probably a good time to throw questions out if they come up. So I'll pause right about the times when the checklist appears. If you have questions, that'd be a good time to throw them at me.
Okay, we don't have any questions yet.
Cut down the perennial flowers. You can see by looking at this picture down here, you can see this, it is alive down here at the base. but it is dead up here at the top. Plant's fine, the plant's alive. This is actually a normal process. Everything above the ground dies off. Some of the roots stay intact, although actually a good chunk of the roots die off as well. And the crown is left alive. And when the spring comes around, the leaves will start growing again, the roots will start growing again, and this plant's just fine. But we're going to want to take off all of that material up there so that we can make room for the New Year's growth on these. Okay, everything that you see in these pictures are perennial flowers with dead above the ground growth. So you'll want to cut back. These are Mexican sunflowers. You want to cut these all the way back to the ground. And this is dead and dying and crispy. You'll want to take those to the ground as well. However, not all perennial evergreens, or not all perennial plants do this. You don't want to cut back the evergreens. There are plenty of perennial plants in our landscapes that actually are evergreen, and you don't actually want to cut them down. And a couple examples of these are right here. This one over here is a euphorbia called Mrs. Rob's Bonnet, and these are pine leaf penstemons over here. They will remain this way year round, and really just need a good cleaning out rather than a cutting down. They would survive a cutting down, but they don't like it quite as much, and they don't really need it. This plant this year, because we had such a dry, kind of windy, dry, cold winter, actually did desiccate the upper part of this plant, and we actually did end up having to cut it down to the ground this year, and it'll be fine after that. But since it was, if it's going to be perfectly alive, go ahead and leave it up. And remember, the evergreen just doesn't mean it's green. These are also all evergreen. This is a partridge feather in here. This is a horehound up here. You've got the yucca up here, you've got the evergreen plant here, you've got a euphorbia over here. So all of these plants are evergreen, and they really just want to be cleaned out. If there's any dead, you can go ahead and cut it off. Any dead perennial, even if it's an evergreen perennial that is dead above ground, go ahead and cut that off. It cleans it up, makes it look nicer, and kind of gets it ready for some new growth. So keep in mind, these are also evergreens. Okay, so some specific advice for cleaning up perennials. Okay. Remove any part of the plant that appears dead. You can see on this picture over here, about half of it appears dead, half it doesn't. Feel free to go through and cut away any of these dead stuff. It'll make it look better. And don't be afraid to cut into the plant that is alive. It'll grow back just fine. Leave only any foliage that's still green. I think still green is in quotations because a lot of this stuff is more gray than green. Okay, so leave the base growth, leave anything that is green, and go ahead and cut away anything that is crispy and dry and dead. It'll make room for next year's new nice growth, and it'll make the plant look better. Okay, so cut down perennial flowers. Done. Clean up ornamental grass is the next one coming up. So we're going to trim down the non-evergreen ornamental grasses. So if the plant has healthy leaves in the winter, don't cut back. But you can see all the top on these deciduous grasses, everything above the ground kind of dies back, and so every year we'll go through and we'll cut them back. You can kind of see what it looks like when we do that. We'll cut it around the sides, cut it up the top. You can do this with a pair of hedgers or an electric hedger, or even just your pruners. Okay, this is kind of an example of what it looks like before we cut it back and after we cut it back. Okay, so this is kind of the look we're going for right there. And to kind of make the point a little more clear, we're going to remove about 2/3 of the plant and leave the bottom third, and then clean it up around the side. So if you're going to have any questions of what that looks like, here's a really good example of what that looks like. Now, there are some ornamental grasses here that are evergreen in nature. We actually do have some evergreen grasses, and this is actually a pretty good example of one. This is a blue oat grass. So blue oat grass, blue fescue, and a few others will fall into this evergreen grass territory. And so it does take some practice to identify these grasses. So basically, if you look at it and you can kind of see like the green and the kind of dead grass kind of intermingle together, then you can kind of tell that that plant probably doesn't cut down. It's going to be more raked out. And so with this, we're really just going to take a stiff rake and give it a good raking through. And you can see over here, like this is before we get started, and over here, this is after we get done. And so what we've done is we've just used a rake, good stiff rake, like this one right here in this picture, and then just just raked it out from the bottom up, kind of like a good stiff brushing of the hair, and it takes out all this dead and leaves this behind, ready for it to grow and look good this year. Now, if you are curious about how do you figure out kind of what grasses are, or how do you figure out what kind of care you should give a plant, not only does our website and our plant database talk about these plants and give you a lot of information on them, but it will also give you some basics on the plant care. So if you go to our database, all the plants should have this little section for you. Okay, so some basic advice on taking care of ornamental grasses. Okay, dead grasses can be cut to roughly a third of its height. Evergreen grasses like blue oak grass or blue fescue just need to be raked out. And cold season grasses like Karl Forster can be cut down in the fall. So everybody's seen the Karl Forsters. We maybe even have them. We tend to cut those down in the fall rather than wait till spring, because they start greening up so much earlier than the other stuff that we kind of like to be able to take that down in the fall, so it's just ready for the growth come spring, because a lot of times that's already growing by late February or early March, and so we just kind of like to have it ready in the fall. Warm season grasses, more like the maiden grasses or the switch grasses, they don't start greening up really heavy and start growing at the base till it gets much warmer, and so we'll wait until it warms up to cut those back. So ornamental grasses on our little checklist, cut down. Next one is
okay.
Yes.
Sorry, we have we had a couple of questions about perennials and cutting those back that I wanted to throw in because we got it a couple of times. So sorry, I'm a section behind. The you talked about cutting down perennials in the spring, and there were a couple of people asking about doing it in the winter, or what would be the reasons to do it in the spring versus the winter, and some of those things.
Okay, so the timing on cutting down of perennials. The timing as far as the plant is concerned probably isn't all that important. If you come to the fall and your coneflowers look dead and crispy, you can go ahead and cut them down. However, I would encourage leaving them up, and there's a couple reasons for this. One, having it up, like after it snows, you'll actually have something poking up above the snow. So it does give you actually something to look at into the winter landscape as you go forward. But I think the bigger reason for me, if I'm going to leave up my perennials, is I like to leave the perennials up and the seed heads up, because it does give the birds something to eat during the winter time as well. So to me, it's just better looking to look at during the winter, to still have those even if it's kind of a dead or crispy flower up. But a lot of birds and things really like to eat those seed heads, and so I'll leave them up for that. That reason alone is kind of enough for me. So hope that helps. That it?
Thank you.
Move on. Okay. All right. Pruning shrubs. Few things I think are as intimidating to most people as pruning. So this is obviously not a pruning class, but I'm going to give you a few general pieces of advice when it comes to pruning. Pruning promotes and controls growth at the same time. When I mean it promotes growth is when you prune, when you take a woody plant like a tree or a shrub, and you prune some of the stems off, what that plant's actually hearing you say is, we actually want you to grow in the parts that remain. And since you've taken off stems, you've got this balance between the stems up top and the roots underneath. When you take away some of those stems up top, the plant wants to balance it again with the root area, and so that will encourage it to grow. So there are a few things that you're going to want to do, and there's a few reasons why we might want to prune. The first one being health. We want to take off the dead or diseased branches. There are better times to prune in this season than other times, but when it comes to dead or diseased branches, take those off anytime. Those need to come off. Thinning for airflow is a good health as well. Shape, you want to prune for direction. You want the things to stop hanging out over the sidewalks so people can get by, or like rubbing up against that shed or the house. Also, you want to prune for rejuvenation. There are certain plants that just look better with rejuvenation pruning. Everybody sees the forsythia that is blooming right now. That is a classic plant that you prune for rejuvenation. What you do is you go in and you take out the bigger, thicker, older ones, and the newer growth kind of rejuvenates the plant, and those are just going to kind of look better as time goes on. Dogwood is similar. So you also want to prune for appearance. You want to reduce or control the size and volume of a plant for better flower or stem color. So there's lots of good reasons. I would say if you're pruning a plant every year to control the size, you might want to consider getting a smaller plant for that area, just to cut down on how much work they are. I have a hard time, putting a big plant in a small area than trying to prune it to size. So I would say that's pick the better plant for the area. This is a good example of pruning for appearance and regenerative pruning. So this is a red twig dogwood. One of the joys of red twig dogwood is those red stems. Now, after 3 or 4 years, they actually will develop a bark and not look as good. And so pretty regular, we go through and prune out the older stems that have bark growing on them. And so that all we get is this bright red color. And this is really one of the best reasons to have a dogwood. But you do need to prune it to keep it looking like this, in terms of keeping it regenerated and pruning off the ones that don't look as good. There is a good timing to pruning flowering shrubs that prune in the spring. So if you've got a shrub that's going to prune before, say, June, so we're talking about lilacs, we're talking about forsythia, we're talking about mock orange. These things you want to prune after they get done flowering. What'll happen is a flowering shrub, in the weeks or so after it blooms, will start assessing its resources. It's got this much root space, it's got this much kind of energy that it can use, and it will start laying out the flower buds for the following spring in the month or so after it's done flowering. And so if you take that month and prune it, it'll take all of the flower buds that it was going to put on the plant, and now we'll put them on the fewer stems that are left, and thus making a much more floriferous plant and make it much better looking. If you wait much longer than that, or prune it a little bit later, you end up with all those flowers that it already assigned to those stems lost with the season. So prune it right after, like really within a few weeks after it's done flowering, is the best time to prune these shrubs. All right, so some specific advice. I'm kind of like to point out this. This is what happens when plants get rubbing together, is you end up getting this big wound, and you can get a lot of kinds of pathogens or infections moving into that. So specific advice. Spring pruning is for the shrubs that bear fruit or flower in the summer or fall. And I did something, there we go. Prune anything dead, diseased, or dumb, is what we call things that just kind of in people's way or rubbing against buildings. You can prune those things any time of year. There's a general rule that you don't want to prune 25 or 30% out of a shrub at any given time. Dead and diseased don't count towards that number. Wait until after the shrubs that flower before June to prune, and then prune them after. So we're talking about lilacs and forsythia and things like that. Wait till they're done pruning to prune for next year. You'll get a much better display. Don't prune in the fall. The person who probably influenced my pruning the most told me don't prune in months that end in R. So September, October, November, December. These, like I mentioned before, pruning is an event that actually spurs growth or encourages growth. And if you get that too close to the end of the season, it doesn't have a chance to harden off that stuff, harden off that new growth, and it's a good way to encourage disease into a plant over the winter. All right, pruning shrubs, done. Controlling weeds. Yeah, I'm sure this is everybody's favorite one. A little bit of weed control. So here are some of the weeds that we are facing right now in the spring. So this is stonecrest, that's henbit. And then we got the prickly lettuce. With the prickly lettuce, obviously, we're just getting just these little rosettes forms right here. But everybody's probably seeing this kind of stuff in their yard. At least I know I'm seeing it here in the garden. This is my best tool for doing weeding. And this is the first tool I go to, and this is the tool that I use probably 90+% of all my weed control. This will take care of most anything. A little elbow grease and a sharp tool will take care of almost every single weed problem you have. No warning label, no spray, no spray damage to your favorite plants. This is my go-to tool. This is the one I carry with me professional pretty much at all times. This is another weed control tool. So whether it's granules or chemicals, or organic, they all have guidelines. But let me give you a really specific piece of advice. You'll notice up here we've got a warning label. Read the warning label. Read that label. In fact, read the whole label, from front to back before you use it. You may think you understand it. You may think you know the product. But it is a good idea and it is good practice to read through that label and just to see what's in there, because there's a few things in there you might want to know. It'll give you indication on what PPE to use. In other words, what protection you need to use when you're spraying it. It'll give you information on how long the chemical takes to dry, and thus how long before it becomes safe, for dogs or things to run through that area again. It'll give you information on what to do if you have a spill, or how to dispose of it, or what to do if you get it on your skin or eyes. So this is actually a really important label to read through. And also, and I'm trying to hammer this point home real quick here, this is a legal document. This is a contract. By using the product, you're actually agreeing to everything in that label as if it were a legally binding contract. So you might want to know what you're actually agreeing to when you use that product. So I would encourage you to read through that thing if you're going to go ahead and use some weed killer. Pre-emergent, this is optional. This is really a solution for the annual weeds, things like crabgrass or things that pop up annually on a regular basis. What this does is you put it down, you water it in, and it creates this layer just under the soil line. And what happens when a plant germinates and the seed sends this little sprout up, the little leaf hits that chemical line and it absorbs the pesticide, and then it kills the plant. And so that in theory helps it keep hurt plants that are trying to get established that year, like annual things like crabgrass, but doesn't hurt an existing plant because it just doesn't come into contact with it as much. So herbicide is a good way to keep those things down. But we do have what I think that we think of as our weed control recipe. And if you do these things, I promise that vast majority of your weed problems will kind of go away. And if you keep this up over time, vast majority of weed problems will just end up being non-existent. Okay, first one, water with drip irrigation in your planting beds. You trying to figure out why drip irrigation is important to weeds. Well, drip irrigation sits on the ground, waters the soil, and doesn't spray it up in the air. And when you have a mulch on top of the drip lines, all of your weed seeds and stuff tend to sit on top of the mulch, and they're not getting resources. They're not getting water because you're watering underneath the line of mulch. And so you're not encouraging the weed seeds. They're not finding the soil to make contact. And so those two things alone make a big difference in it. Avoid soil compaction. If you're going to walk over an area or drive over an area like a lot, compacted soil causes a lot of problems with the way air flows through soil. And there's quite a few plants out there that actually like that environment, but we think of those plants as all as weeds. So compacted soil is a really good source for weeds. So if you're going to, like I said, if you're going to compact something like you're walking back and forth through the same area, go ahead and make a path through that area so you're not walking down the soil. Minimize soil disruption. Anything that disrupts the compost layer or disrupts the soil does a couple things. The second you drag something across soil, you now expose all of that stuff underneath to a little more air and a little more sunlight and a little more warmth. Seeds that existed a little further down now can germinate. So minimize your soil disruption. And then use the herbicides after you've done the first 4 steps. We like to talk about herbicides, and we talk about it last. It is the last line of defense. It is used for a few specific plants, and it is just what you do kind of last. I've already told you that the vast majority of the weed control that we do here at the garden is done with that weed knife and just kind of getting on our hands and knees and taking care of it that way. But if you're going to use them, make sure you follow the advice I gave before and read that label. So some specific advice. Take care of weeds early to keep them becoming from a problem, later that year and in years to come. Okay, so just taking care of weeds before they become a problem and then kind of keeping up on it is one of the best weed control methods available. and is free and cheap, really. If you find yourself walking the path of your landscape and continually compacting that area, make a path. That disturbance attracts all kinds of weeds. So don't use weed fabric. Weed fabric doesn't work. Weed fabric has a lot of promises that don't come true at all, and it just doesn't work. And don't let the weeds flower or go to seed. If there was a single piece of advice I could give you about weeds, if they flower, they're going to produce seeds. Don't let them flower. Stay on top of them before they flower, and that's that'll keep a big part of your weed problem down. So weed control done. The landscape's already looking really good at this point. All right, fertilizer. Spring is not a bad time to fertilize. It's not the best time. I would say the best time is in the fall, when things are trying to grow roots. But spring is a reasonably good time to do it. Now, something I'd like you to understand about fertilizer is that fertilizer isn't plant food. You often hear it called plant food, and fertilizer isn't really food. Plants make their own food through photosynthesis. This is more like a vitamin supplement. So what we're going to do is you want to know, and you don't fertilize plants is another kind of thing I'd like to put out there. You're actually not giving your plants fertilizer. You're giving the soil fertilizer, and then the plants know what they need and they'll take it up. So as long as the nutrients you need are in the soil, the plant can find it. So really what you want to know is what is missing from my soil. It's what does my soil not have? And then replace what is necessary. And one of the single best ways to do that is this site right here, and do a Utah State University Extension soil test. The website for this is called Usual. It's Utah State University Analytics Lab. A simple soil test is relatively inexpensive, and it will give you some specific advice on what to put down there. So you can see phosphorus. You can see when we took this soil test, turned out we had an area that was really, really low on the phosphorus. And so now we know we need phosphorus in that area. So we're not putting down a bunch of stuff we don't need. We do know we need phosphorus, and we don't need any potassium, and we need maybe a little bit of nitrogen. So now we have a good idea, and we have some real scientific advice to guide us on what that area needs. And so we're not putting down fertilizer that is in the soil already, and then wasting, just kind of wasting time and money on that one. Okay, so I'm going to have you look at this picture real quick. The three numbers on a fertilizer bag. The first one is nitrogen. The second one is phosphorus. The third one is potassium. I've done a lot of soil tests out here at the garden over the years. I've never seen one once that comes back that says you need potassium. I've never once needed potassium. So if you're going to put fertilizer down, one piece of advice I would give you is no potassium. You probably don't need it. Most of the time, what you need is some nitrogen, and then phosphorus, usually to a lesser extent. But again, this is why I think you take a soil test in your specific area and put down really specifically what you need. So some specific advice. Compost, like a good layer of compost, actually acts as most of the nitrogen fertilizer that you're going to need, and it's really natural stuff. So as long as you keep a good 2-3 inches of compost on your landscape, nitrogen usually isn't a problem. Water the product in within a few days, or wait till there's a rainstorm on the horizon. If you throw out granulars onto the ground and then just let it sit there, you actually lose a lot of the nitrogen to the atmosphere, and you'll lose a lot of that product. So make sure you water that thing in, or if you know we have a rainstorm coming up like we've had the last few days, it would have been a great time to put it down because the rainstorm can water it in. But you do need to water this stuff in. Fertilize based on need. Do a soil test, figure out what you need. You can use that same information for a few years. I'll be honest, I'll take a soil test out here. I'll let that guide me on how much nutrients I need to put back in the soil and what specifically I do. And I might use that same test for like 3 years before I take another one. So go ahead and use the test. You can actually use that for a few years to come. Okay, fertilizer. Remember, this is optional. This is a good fall exercise, but it's not a bad one in the spring, so it's optional. But fertilizing done. Now we're going to look at thickening up the mulch. While I wait here, see if any questions have popped up.
Okay,
Yes.
so we just had one come in that asks if we have a couple of inches of mulch around shrubs, do we need to remove all of this before fertilizing?
That's actually a really good question. The short answer is no. It makes it more important to get it watered in, but if you water it in, the water, it'll dissolve in the water, and the water will get past the mulch and go into the soil. So no, you can throw it right down on top of the compost or your wood chips or whatever, and then just water it in. Shouldn't be a problem.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, thicken up the mulch. 2 or 3 inches, 4 inches of mulch has a ton of benefits for this. It retains moisture. It looks better than soil. Organic mulch can really do a lot for your soil. You can see we just have a big pile of mulch here at the garden. We use obviously a lot of it. So this is our stacks of mulch out here for the garden. There's 2 types of mulch that I want to go over. One is organic mulch, and the other is inorganic mulch. So organic mulch are things that are made of stuff that will break down. These are wood chips. These are like grass and leaves that people shredded and put out there, or these are something like arborist wood chips. Arborist wood chips are really cool. They're just basically a shredded up tree, and you end up getting the whole thing, bark, wood, leaves, and everything. Non-organic mulch is this stuff. So it's types of gravel or other things that don't break down the soil. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to both of these types of mulch. Organic mulch breaks down, makes your soil better, and is probably the best reason to use it is because of that. They all, like I said, they all retain moisture. They all look better than dirt, like bare soil. They all keep weeds down, so they're all useful. Organic stuff will break down and help their soil. The gravel stuff there, the inorganic stuff, the non-organic mulch, doesn't break down, but you also don't need to replace it like every year. We're likely to put compost every year on a lot of these garden beds out here because the compost breaks down. Now the breaking down is how it's helping the soil, so that's actually part of the deal. Actually, when it comes to organic mulch, actually it's what we want. But with these inorganic mulches, they still have lots of benefit. But again, they don't break down. You don't have to replace them every year. And care on them can be as simple as a blower to just blow them off. So kind of pluses and minuses to both. So some specific advice about thickening up the mulch. Mulch might be the single best thing you can do for the soil because it keeps weeds down, looks better than bare soil, prevents the erosion of the topsoil, improves soil structure, at least the organic mulch does, and retains moisture. It also keeps soil cooler in the summertime. If you were to measure the difference between like a mulch on top of a garden bed, say next to a sidewalk, the sidewalk and the mulch would be similar temperatures, but as soon as the sun went down, the cement would actually retain all that heat, where the mulch actually lets it go pretty quick and helps it cool it down, especially at night. All right, thickening up the mulch, done. Now we're going to start up the irrigation system and make some basic repairs. So starting up your irrigation system every year, there's a few, I think, pieces of advice I think we can go over to help people get this done. You can see there's 2 different types of irrigation startups here. The one I think probably more people are familiar with, but I don't know anymore. That is the big key you put down like 5 feet in the ground and you're turning a stop and waste valve. This other one is what I have in my house. In fact, this picture is taken from my house. I have it's stop and waste, but it's just got a different control system. I can open this up to drain it into the bucket. I can turn this on to redirect it out into the irrigation system. But this would also be a good time in the spring to make some basic repairs, to make some adjustments. In fact, when you get everything started up for the year, I would suggest going through the system and making sure it all works. Okay, so some specific advice on this one. Turn on every zone, but leave it on for about 10 minutes. turning it on and then turning back off, it sometimes takes a while for things to pressurize, and then that will help leaks in the lines present themselves. Or it takes time that if there is a leak somewhere, you kind of need to give it some time to bubble up to the surface. So let those things run for at least 10 minutes and let that do that with every single zone, and then walk the zone, see what's going on with it. Make sure the sprinkler heads are pointed in the proper direction onto the lawn, not sidewalks, not driveways, things like that. You really want this is a good chance to this is a good time to just make sure everything's pointed the right way. Walk through all the drip line zones. Those are a little harder to see, but again, if you let them run for 10 minutes, you should see a little bit of water on the surface of the compost, of the soil, or the mulch, or things like that. And you're going to want to look especially hard. Like if you don't see it, then maybe there's some reason why it's not getting to there. Or if it looks really wet, maybe you've got a leak. So walk those areas, kind of look up and down and see what you've got. But again, let it run for a good 10 minutes. A lot of these things don't pop up immediately, and it takes a little bit of time to really be able to see them. Turn on your lines using both the valves and the controller itself. So it's just a good time if you're going to check your irrigation system to make sure the valve is working. Just you can go down and kind of turn it on, but also make sure you turn it on through the controller, because that makes sure the controller is working as you expected as well. So doing both of these things is a really good way to make sure you have it all set. And in living in a desert like we do, having that irrigation system is a good way to really have that landscape end up being fairly healthy. All right, so this is probably the last chance for questions before I go into some of these other spots. Do we have anything that's popped up?
We had a couple of people ask about with the irrigation system, when do you turn it on? How do you know when to turn on the water to turn on your system?
Okay, so we do have a little guide out, and it's coming up actually really quickly here. I'll display it here on the presentation, but we do have a guide. The short answer is that we've always given is right around Mother's Day is usually a good time. This year it seemed like we might have to do that earlier, but after this storm for the last couple of days, I don't see any reason why we're going to need to turn that on for another several weeks. So yeah, the short answer is second week of May or so, depending on the weather. If it's a little drier, maybe you have to go a little sooner, although we don't often see that. Had one a couple of years ago where I remember I didn't turn on mine at home, and in fact, I think we didn't turn on the one here in the garden until sometime around mid-June. We had a wet year a couple of years ago, so you kind of have to think about it in those lines. But generally speaking, I would suggest right around Mother's Day is when that startup starts to happen. And do keep in mind, it's a good idea to, these smart controllers that we have are really good at monitoring how much rainfall we had and then replacing it, rather than just kind of a timer that throws it out whenever. So the general idea is what we need in May and what we need in October is different than what we're going to need in like July and August. And so you don't want something watering the same in all of those months. So I would wait until sometime around Mother's Day to start up the irrigation systems.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take a lot of these pieces of advice that I've given you throughout this thing, and we're going to kind of go step by step on a couple of these untidy landscapes and see if we can't make them look a little bit better. So how do we go from here to here? And it's funny because we just did this here at the garden. This is a spot we just recently did. The filming is from a kind of a year past, but we just ended up doing this earlier this week. Okay, so let's start in this little spot right here and go through kind of step by step. Okay, rake leaves, cut back dead foliage on the perennials, clean up the rim of grass, do a little pruning, and there you go. Control the weeds, apply fertilizer, pick up the mulch. This is the area from the original picture. Rake up some leaves, cut back these the dead perennial foliage, clean up the ornamental grasses, prune some shrubs. Those are a little bit of lilacs back there. Control those weeds, apply fertilizer, thicken up mulch. Now, these steps, you can do them kind of in whatever order you want, but if you go through and do all of these things, you'll end up making your landscape look really nice and get it ready for spring. So you see these steps, most of the time are going to kind of get you where you're going. Break up some leaves, cut back the perennials, clean up the ornamental grass, prune shrubs, in this case, kind of off the pathways. Some weeds back there, fertilizers, picking up the mulch. And this is that watering guide that I told you about. You can see planting beds start around Mother's Day. And you can kind of see we have this little thing here. This guide, I believe, is available on our website, but it's also available in printed forms, I think, here at the garden. So, or you can screenshot this, however you wish to go about it. But it does give some general advice for watering here in northern Utah. You can see it breaks up lawn from planting bed area, and it does kind of give you some generalized advice on the bigger rotators versus some fixed spray. And then over here are some drip line and planting beds. So it's pretty short, pretty to the point. If you want more about some of these other things, like you're looking for information on like irrigation, we do have irrigation workshop right here on the our YouTube channel. Okay, so start up, make basic system repairs, and we're going to call this our done list.
So we did have a question about how, let's see, I wrote down a few questions. So what mulch is the best for weed control, and like how do you determine what size of mulch you want to use? Is that just personal preference, or are there considerations for that?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is it really is personal preference, but there are some things you might want to consider when you're choosing mulch. Are you looking for, I mean, what is the aesthetic you're looking for? Do you like having like a colored mulch or a colored rock? I've seen some really attractive ones that look really good that way. Do you want it breaking down and improving your soil? Do you think like the compost looks good? I'd lean towards the compost myself, or smaller wood chips. I would say bigger chunks when it comes to bigger rocks or bigger chunks of wood or bark tends to hold down weeds less because it tends to give them a little bit of air between the chunks that weeds tend to find their way up. So if you're looking for better weed control specifically, a smaller particle, whether it's a small gravel or like the compost, would actually form a tougher layer to keep weeds down. So there are some things to consider, but there's a lot, it has a lot here to do with like your personal preference or like what aesthetic you're going for in your landscape.
Thank you. There's another question, and it's been asked a couple of times, about how do you rake leaves out of planting beds with mulch without moving the mulch around, or like what is the process for that?
Okay, that's funny. I do this all the time. And I don't think much about it. But although I do end up having to like teach it sometimes to gardeners when they come on. And this actually might be something that I think would make a cool video at some point. Maybe we can make a video that shows people this kind of specific thing. And you're right, it can be a little intimidating to rake that kind of thing. And so the gist of it is you kind of put your rake out there and you don't rake hard. You sort of kind of a gentle rake across the top will get most of the leaves. I'll bring it over and like if you're going to rake it out onto a sidewalk or something, I'll sort of rake through that and get most of it and then blow what I think of the compost back in. But yeah, it's really a feel. Like there really is a feel to it. You put it down there, you put a little bit of pressure on the rake itself to try to just get the top off and not really disturb the mulch too much. But it's it's a feel thing, and really once you've done it a few times, you'll sort of understand. But this might be something we actually do have to make some sort of short, like 1 or 2 minute long video on maybe the techniques we use to get in and out of or raking on top of mulch. There is tricks to it. They're a little hard to put into words, but it can be done. We do it here all the time. So come out to the garden one day when we're working, and we'll show you. In fact, anybody listening, if you haven't been here, like, come on out to the garden and make sure you say hi, because we're usually out there. So
yeah, and feel free to come ask us questions as well. We're happy to help when we can and where we can.
Somebody came up to me in the garden and just says, "Can you give me a quick rake on mulch demonstration?" I'd like it'd do it in a heartbeat. It'd make me happy. So, but yeah, there's a feel to it, and I could probably demonstrate it a lot easier than I could probably talk about it this way.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question we have is there anything that you shouldn't prune in the spring? Any like shrubs or trees or things?
Okay. The short answer is no, I think. Most things can be pruned in the spring. The longer answer is obviously with those things that flower, if you want to have a better display, is to wait till after they're flowering. But the short answer is spring is really the time to do it. If you want the optimal time, it's about the time the buds are swelling but haven't leafed out yet, is like the most optimal time. But no, you can prune most things in the spring. Now, 3 o'clock in the morning, I might wake up and go, oh yeah, there's that one thing. But right now, I can't think of anything that I usually avoid pruning in the springtime. Definitely, there's plenty of things that you want to avoid in the fall. In fact, just about everything. But there are a few things in the fall that I will especially stay away from because I know they really hate it. Roses come immediately to mind. But definitely, I don't think there's anything I particularly avoid in the spring.
Okay, awesome. We had a really good question about if you're using compost as a fertilizer, do you till it into the ground?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We do get this one pretty periodically. No, absolutely no. One of those points I try to make when it comes to weed control was don't disturb your soil. The best way I can think of to disturb your soil is to break out a tiller on it. So tillers do a lot of like really honestly bad things to your soil. They break up the mycorrhizae networks that are already in there. They break up those little aggregates that have been formed by the humus down in there that create the water and air channels in there, and they actually tear those up. They can actually bring weed seeds that are 4 or 5 inches down below and bring them to the surface. They weren't bothering anybody before, but now they're going to sprout. So no, a layer of compost or mulch right on the surface, and then just let the microorganisms do all the mixing for you. Let the stuff do the work. But no, absolutely no pruning, or sorry, no tilling for sure. And in fact, for me, that even goes for most vegetable gardens. I don't till those either. In fact, I'm really anti-tilling. I'm really anti-disturbing the soil in any meaningful way. So.
Thank you. So someone asked about, they said that sorry, my thing keeps moving. Some plant sites say to cut ornamental grasses back to about 3 inches, and they said that this seems pretty drastic compared to our leave a third of the grass up. Do you want to kind of address that?
Sure. I think that's way too short, obviously, because I wrote this presentation. Yeah, no, I think if you cut it back, I think if you were to cut it back for like 2 or 3 inches in the fall and then let it overwinter that way, I think that's a really good way to kill the grasses. There's actually a lot of evidence out there that leaving, like one of the reasons we might leave ornamental grass up during the winter and then do this in the spring, not only, I mean, for me, like the birds shelter in it, the birds eat the seeds, and so for me, that's enough to do it. But there actually is a lot of literature out there that suggests that leaving the mass on top of the plant and then cutting down the spring actually helps insulate it during the winter time and helps those roots survive better. And I think if you were to take that off and then cut it that short, I think all that insulation goes away, and I think you really have the problem that it's going to end up drying out really desiccating out during the winter time. So I actually think that could actually become a real problem if you cut it down too short like that. And it's just not necessary. It doesn't make it look better. And I do know that if you prune it something like that 2/3 mark and leave it, a foot or a foot and a half, you get a much better bloom later on. So a lot more in the seed heads. So the taller you leave it. So yeah, I wouldn't prune it at all that short.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for addressing that, Mike. Someone asked, do you dig your fertilizer into the ground or just lay it on the surface?
Again, I would lay it on the surface. If you've gotten the impression that I don't like disturbing the soil much, then I've given you the correct impression. Yes, I would fertilize on it, and then just the big key here, just make sure you get it watered in. Is the real key. But yeah, I wouldn't even try to incorporate it into the soil at all. It'll get there if you just water it in.
Yeah. There was someone, you were talking earlier about not disturbing the soil.
Somebody wants to know about aeration. I just know it. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
That is actually the question they asked about aeration versus not disturbing the soil.
Yeah, I felt that one coming. Okay, so aeration is a soil disturbance. It's just not as bad a soil disturbance. I actually think aeration is fairly useful, but when I say aeration, I'm actually talking about like those little tines that you can press into the ground and pull a core out. That doesn't disturb it as much as like actual like digging into it. Those things that pull a core out actually do a couple things. They let air and water now in a little more into the ground. So yes, I think aeration. Again, I'm talking about core aeration, the ones that actually pull a little core, not like those like shoes or those sandals you put on your feet and has the big spikes that people walk around in. That's actually not aerating anything. But things that actually use a core and take a core out are actually really good for both lawn and garden beds. Absolutely. So core aeration is really would end up being a positive thing. That's not as disturbing as some of the other stuff. So I would absolutely go ahead with that one.
Awesome. So we've had a couple people ask about dividing perennials and ornamental grasses. One was about like the process of doing it and if we were going to cover that, or if that's a separate class, which we don't have a separate class for that right now. I don't know if you want to touch on that, but the other part, someone else asked about also with the ornamental grasses, and is now a good time to do divisions and transplant things?
Yeah, in fact, now's one of the best times to do it. I think there's two really good times of the year to plant new plants. Either in the fall when things are cooling down and you're heading into winter. It's actually a pretty good time to plant a new plant, and fairly early in the spring. So March and April will make really good time to plant those things. And dividing is really just planting new plants, and you have to treat them as such. So yes, now would be a good time to divide both ornamental grasses and dividable perennials, and then treat them just like you bought a new plant, water it in, get it established like a new plant. But yeah, now would actually be a fairly good time to do it. I wouldn't wait a whole lot longer, but now would be actually a really good time.
Awesome. So we have time for maybe one or two more questions. There was someone who asked about advice on edging beds that border on planting beds that border on grass and keeping the grass out of the planting beds.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about trying to keep like Kentucky bluegrass from coming into the beds or invading your beds. Yeah, that's actually a tough one, and it is a concern when you're putting up a local scape. A couple approaches you might want to consider, and I know the first answer I'm going to give you is like almost off topic, but bear with me just for a minute. Kentucky bluegrass does run under it by spreading through rhizomes, so it does run underground. If you were to put a different cold season grass in that area, say a dwarf tall fescue, that actually wouldn't have the same problem as the traditional Kentucky bluegrass does. So one of the solutions is to plant a more clumping turf grass like dwarf tall fescue. If you want to see what that looks like, we have some here at the garden if you want to come take a look. but to answer the real question and how to keep it out, there's a couple approaches, and they're both management. There's almost no way to just put a fix in place and leave it that way. I think you're going to be managing that for long term. So first of all, that weed knife that I showed you guys is actually a pretty decent tool for just rooting out grass and pushing it back. But they do make edging tools. If you go to a hardware store, and it's this little half moon shaped shovel, like with a straight edge to it. I will make an edge where I want it, and then I will take my weeding knife and then just weed out anything that I don't want. And I'll do that at least once a year. I might do that a second time in a year, but that's all. I don't think it's not something you have to keep up on weekly or anything like that, but you do have to do it a couple times a year where you get in there and get that out. So, but that's probably my favorite way to do it, is use what we call a half moon spade. We kind of cut along the edge, and then we just weed the grass out on the other side. And we might have to do that a couple times a year. Putting in a good edging might also work, like a good steel edging. But even then, I think Kentucky bluegrass would just find a way around that. So I really think you're just managing it kind of by hand, by and large. But again, I don't think it's like a weekly event. I think this is more like a couple times a year type of a management.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, for answering those questions.